everybody. Hi. End of the day here today. Next period, you're on your way home. But this hour, I'd like you to really lean in. This is a special time here. I'd like you to really be able to take in some of the teaching. I'd like you to, if you feel comfortable, to be able to ask any questions that you want. This is not the kind of drug education you've ever had before. I don't teach middle school drug education because I did one in my son's class, and that night I'm cooking dinner for him and I get a phone call from a parent that says, "Are you Mr. Cantor?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "What the hell did you tell my kid today in class? Did you tell my kid he smokes marijuana, it might make him feel good?" I don't want my kid to know that. "You told my kid he smokes marijuana and bites into an apple, it might taste better? What the hell are you teaching my kid?" I stopped teaching middle school. I do drug education, okay? The second thing about this stuff is that I particularly am focused on teenagers, okay? During this time between 12 and 18, there's a lot of stuff that's going on for you. It's the last big developmental stage in your life. And basically what it is you are leaving childhood and you are moving into, I have no idea what an adult is, but you are moving into what I want to call individuation. You are starting to figure out who you are and how are you different from other people. When you were 10 or 11 years old, you came with friends and you hung out and you did whatever you did. You went to a party, you did whatever you did. But once you get to be 15 years old, it's a different ballgame. Who do I want to hang out with? What do I want to do when I'm there? How do I party? What is all this about for me? And this is when you got to start to figure out, how do you have a good time? Who are you? What are your interests? Are you more of a people person? Are you more of an art person? Are you more of a science person? Who are you? That's the time between 12 and 18 that you're trying to figure out who you are. That's what interests me so much, okay? So, I just took this out. Wrong thing, Ralph. These are the little puppies I am looking for. So here's your brain. Something that only us and dolphins have on the planet, and I don't think that dolphins use it, is this prefrontal cortex. This is an amazing thing that gets enormous props in our society. This is the thing that helps us talk to one another, and only us and dolphins on the planet have it, and I don't think dolphins use it. But we sure do. It's what school is about. It's all of how we communicate, okay? And during this time, when you're trying to figure out who you are, you got your parents telling you stuff, you got the school telling you stuff, you got your friends telling you stuff, you got the media you got all sorts of people that are telling you stuff. But I want to say something here. You have, what happened to the rest of my pens? Forget it, I'll go with just 2 today here. You got a whole rest of your brain here. That's also very much who you are. Only it don't talk English or Spanish or a language. It doesn't make sense. It isn't rational. It isn't even conscious. It's subconscious. But this is a lot of who you are also. And part of what I want you to do is begin to tune into this piece. Not just listen to what everybody's saying here, but what's going on in here. And this one you can't have a conversation with. You kind of got to feel your way in there, okay? And so one of the places in here is a place called the nucleus accumbens. So I want to take this and take a slice of it, lay it on a slide, and look at it under a microscope. And if I look at it under a microscope, it looks like this. I didn't even do an introduction to tell you what I was going to teach about. But I'm here now, so this is not a kite. This is not a kite. This is a brain cell. This is the cell membrane. This is the nucleus. And it has these long dendrites that reach out. And here's another one. Now, the whole deal in the brain is how do brain cells talk to one another? How do we think? How does the brain work? And in order to understand that, you go all the way to the end of the dendrite on one brain cell, all the way to the end of the dendrite on another. They come close, but they don't touch, like right there or right there. And I want to take that spot and blow that up under an electron microscope. And when I do that, it looks like this. This is the end of one dendrite, one brain cell. This is the beginning of the next. And basically, the way the brain works is I do want other pens because I got some things here. Always come prepared, Ralph. We get input into the brain all the time. Right now, a lot of you are really listening to me talk about the brain, okay? She may be looking at me and thinking, where does this guy come from? Is he from New York or, yeah, that's what she's thinking, okay? Somebody else, she may be looking here, but she's in Bermuda. I don't know what's going on in anybody's brain. But there's something that goes on in everybody's brain. You get input, okay? When it comes into a brain cell, here's the deal. The brain does basically two things. Number one, it's a chemical factory. What the brain does is cook up chemicals all day long. Those chemicals are called neurotransmitters. Stay with me on this stuff. It's going to take you a long ways, I guarantee it. Getting input into the brain, it says, okay, with that input, I think I'm going to cook up this neurotransmitter. And it cooks it up, and it loads it up on this brain cell. Then the second thing that happens is an electric spark. And the electric spark is called a synapse. And when a synapse happens, what it does is it fires across this space whatever neurotransmitter, whatever chemical it chose to make. And when that puppy hits the receptor site on the next brain cell, we experience something. We either think something or we feel something. Then it goes on to the next and the next and the next. And that's basically the way the brain works, okay? Now, deep down inside, in this subconscious place up here, this place called the nucleus accumbens, it happens to fire off a particular neurotransmitter that's called dopamine. And when dopamine hits the receptor site, some really important things happen. You first get born. The first moments you slip out of your biological mother's womb. They cut the umbilical cord, they tie it up, they sponge off the mucus in the blood, and then hopefully somebody picks that baby up, brings that baby to their chest, and gives that baby some milk. When that milk touches that baby's lips and inputs into that baby's brain, for whatever reason, through God or nature, deep down inside in this nucleus accumbens, it causes it to fire off dopamine in this baby's brain. When the dopamine hits the receptor site in this baby's brain, the baby goes, milk, milk. That yeah, biologically is dopamine hitting a receptor site. Isn't that an interesting thing? Okay, so we used to think that what this was about was pleasure. Somebody touches your skin nice, you eat some chocolate ice cream, it fires off some dopamine, and your brain says, yes, thank you very much, I like that, okay? It turns out it goes much deeper than that. See, if the baby doesn't get milk, the baby dies. Okay, it's really as simple as that. So what it is that's built into this baby's brain, either through nature or with God, is it's saying to this baby, baby, milk important. This is important. That's what this dopamine thing is really about. And it turns out when something's important to you, it's pleasurable. Like for me, it's important to watch the Warriors game. I'm very interested in that. And it fires off dopamine for me and it gives me pleasure. For a lot of people, you couldn't care less about the Warriors game. Something else is what fires off dopamine for you. So this thing here is really your what's important filter. Now, in the beginning, it's the same for everybody. You get loved up, you get milk, you get taken care of, everybody's got it. But once you start to individuate, once you start to figure out who am I, then what fires off dopamine for one person doesn't fire it off for another. There are some people in this room, like me, that could get off on the Pythagorean theorem or learning about gravity and science. For a lot of you, you couldn't care less about that. For somebody else, it might be literature. For somebody else, it might be hanging out with people. I don't know what that is. But what this is telling you is what's important to you. You all with me on this? And I want you to tune into that. That's telling you who you are. Here's where drugs come into this. Instead of this happening and it firing off some dopamine, somebody comes along and says, here, smoke a little of this. Tetrahydrocannabinol, the active ingredient in marijuana. Or here, drink a little of this. I won't go beyond these two for the time being. Now, here's where it gets very interesting. Because you look around the room, everybody's face is different. Everybody's face is different. Everybody's internal organs are different. And the biggest one is everybody's brain is different. And you inherit it from your biological mother and father. And they inherited it from their biological mother and father, going all the way back. So we finally come here, and everybody is carrying around a different thing, okay? So for some people, they got a brain where they look at this stuff, and they go, why would I ever want to smoke weed or drink alcohol and mess around with my brain? Forget it. Not interested. And there's a lot of people here that are like that. Some people here say, well, I'm kind of curious. Maybe I'll smoke a little weed. They smoke some weed and they get paranoid. They don't smoke weed again. Or they drink alcohol and they get sick and throw up. And they don't do that anymore. Some people get born with a brain, and I'll do it just with weed here, that they smoke weed and it does this. This person says, oh, that's not bad. Maybe I'll do it again sometime. And we got all sorts of gradations here to finally you get to a person that they get born with a brain. When they smoke weed, it does this. Bada bing. It fires off a whole bunch of dopamine. This person, so let's just picture this a second. At Redwood High School, we get a 9th grade girl. Smokes some weed, she gets born with a brain where it really works well. Picture this, she smokes the weed, it fires off all this dopamine in her brain. I don't care what her parents say, I don't care what her friends say, I don't care what anybody says. What her brain is saying to her is, this good, this important. This better than mother's milk. You all follow me on that? All it is the dopamine hit. Now, I want to say something here, which is this feeling of firing off a whole bunch of dopamine. I hope you all get there. I hope you do. I hope for some people it can be stepping onto a lacrosse court, or for somebody else, it can, I don't know what it is, but to go, yeah, and I'm interested, this is good. This is what makes you feel alive. This is what your passion is. This is a good thing. This thing here, this weed thing, I am not saying that weed is good or bad. Good Lord, we got to get off of the good and bad stuff. It's the reason why nobody knows anything about weed. Because all you know is people telling you how good it is or telling you how bad it is. And it isn't one thing or the other. It's quite a complex thing here. But there is one thing that's very important to understand, is that this is a trick. This is not the real thing. This is a trick that happens to have the chemical in it that has the magic to be able to fire off all this dopamine so your brain says, yes, thank you very much. But it is not the real thing. It is a trick. You can't look at this and say, this good, this is a trick. That's all that it is. Okay. I think that weed is a better trick than alcohol, cocaine, crystal meth, all the other ones put together. The problem is, between the ages of 12 and 18, when you're trying to figure out who the hell you are, you do not want to trick the brain. You want this puppy to tell you what fires off dopamine for you. You come to a party, how do you party? Not go here first, figure out, how do I party? You feel stressed. I can go here, but how do I take care of it here? I get together with friends. How do I hang out with friends? I mean, think about it a minute. This is the whole area for 420, right? What that was about was, what do you do after school at 4:20 in the afternoon? This is you didn't have to figure it out when you were 10, but you darn well have to figure it out now. And so often in our area, in Northern California, you get together with a group of friends and you go, what are we going to do? Somebody in there goes, I got an idea, let's just roll ourselves a fat one. That way we can all get loaded and we don't need to figure out what to do. It's a done deal. You get bored. You smoke a little weed, you're not bored anymore. Because boredom's kind of like God's way of telling you to get a life. You feel a little stressed. Smoke a little weed, you're not stressed anymore. You feel that. It works, believe me. The way they developed this drug, and I'll talk about it, it works very well. But to trick the brain during this 12 to 18 time, you pay an enormous price. This is a stage when you're trying to figure out what does fire off dopamine for me. Pictures, pictures. These are weird, but I'm sticking by them. This is what I'm saying that your brain looks like at 12. And it's supposed to be a picture in LA of a bunch of little highways running a million directions. What I'm saying that this transforms into just between the ages of 12 and 18. It doesn't totally solidify until you're 25. But when you walk out of Redwood High School at 18, your brain looks like this. And there's two enormous changes that have taken place during this time. Number one, there's less highways, less little highways. It's called pruning. If you've ever seen a gardener prune a tree, they cut out big branches of the tree so the tree then really gets a chance to take its shape and to grow. Here, a lot of those roads that you're not interested in, that don't fire off dopamine for you, they get pruned away. You go to the bathroom during the ages of 12 to 18 and you urinate out thousands of brain cells. You're getting rid of a whole bunch of stuff that you don't want there. You're not interested in it, okay? The second thing that happens is that the roads that you do take during this time get to be major highways. And what that's about is this. Well, I want to talk about this a little bit more in a minute. Let's say this is my brain. And what interested me in growing up was basketball. So I'd be out in front of my house practicing a jump shot. In the beginning with a jump shot, you use your ankles, your calves, your quads, and you jump. Okay? You get into the jump, and then you figure there's a certain spot in that jump where there's a pause, where you're not going up any higher, but you haven't started to come down yet. In that split-second pause, you use your forearm, your wrist, your fingertips, and that's where you take your shot. To watch Steph Curry do it is a beautiful thing, okay? In my brain, so you're going through this whole thing to take the shot. In my brain, I went through a whole bunch of connections that were my jump shot connections. Now I go and I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again. What begins to grow around the outside of these electrical connections is something called myelin. And what myelin is like insulation on a wire. The more you do it, the more it insulates this wire, the better that puppy fires off. So that after a while, it gets hardwired in. So the two things that are happening is the stuff that you're not working drops away, and the stuff that you are working gets to be highways. You all with me on this? So, bored after school, smoke some weed. Well, how do you get the weed? Where do you buy the weed? You got to figure that out. And then after you figure out where you buy the weed, then you got to get money to buy the weed. And then after you got the money and you buy the weed, you look at it and you go, how do you do this? Do you roll it up? Do you grind it up? Do you put it in a pipe? How do you do it? So you got to get all the things that you need in order to be able to do it. So you get all that stuff. Then you got all that stuff, then you got to figure out where you're going to do it. And then you figure out where you're going to do it, you do it, it fires off a whole bunch of dopamine in your brain, and your brain says, thank you very much, I like that. When are we going to do it again? The next time is a heck of a lot easier. The next time is easier. The next time is easier. And that's what begins to get hardwired in. That's my concern at this point. What I want hardwired in is what really fires off dopamine for you. And let me tell you something. This becomes a dead-end street after a while. Reason, number one, even if you were Brad Pitt or Madonna, you are not going to fire off this much dopamine. Only a drug does that. So your brain has to make a whole bunch of dopamine receptor sites to be able to handle all the dopamine. So you begin to develop what I call a party brain. That says, okay, we're ready now, where's the dopamine? The second thing that happens is as you pound the brain with a bunch of dopamine, after a while the receptor sites get duller. You don't feel it as much. So now I'm going to need more of this to be able to fire this off. You follow what I'm saying here? And after a while, you have a brain that wants more, and you feel it less. So this becomes a dead-end street after a while because you want more and you feel it less, okay? And what else do I want to say about it? I'll stop at that point. People have questions? Go ahead. Okay. Yeah?
How did they figure out to smoke weed?
Can you imagine? I mean, you got to go back thousands of years and picturing people going around smoking plants and going, this doesn't do it, this doesn't do it. Oh, this one does it. No, that one. Who knows? But over time, plants have played a very, very important role in human development and in terms of health and wellness and medicines. And you want to know something? We're going to see it again, because one of the things that's coming out of this marijuana plant is CBDs. And these CBDs look like they really have a lot of medicinal value. So that it's always been a constant experimental thing. How they figured it out with that, who knows? Just trial and error, I guess. More questions? Let's talk. Yeah, go for it.
With the concentration of drugs with THC and then like the concentration of it getting higher and higher, are overdoses even possible now?
Good question, and I'm going to go into the potency of it. You can't really overdose on marijuana smoking. It's possible if you smoked a dab or one of the first times you smoke, you can really kind of go out there, okay? But for the most part, you can't really, and then you can keep smoking blunt after blunt, bong hit after bong hit. Those, I didn't go through the cannabinoid sites yet, but those sites get saturated in your brain. You don't get any higher, but you don't overdose. Nothing. You just keep smoking and nothing happens. However, if instead you put it into an edible and you eat it, there your brain doesn't get saturated. It takes 45 minutes to an hour as opposed to 5 minutes lungs to brain. But this way, once it comes on, your brain can absorb all the THC that's in that cookie or brownie. And if there is enough THC in that cookie or brownie, you're tripping. You're tripping just like you took acid or just like you took mushrooms. That's what I call an overdose on marijuana, is to go into that tripping stage. Otherwise, I don't really see an overdose in weed. Did that answer your question, or go ahead?
Yeah, it kind of did. Also, I know they used to make rope out of cannabis.
Yes, hemp. Yeah, I used to sail on ships, and the ropes are made out of hemp. That's a different kind of marijuana. It doesn't get you high. There's a few strains of marijuana. Hemp is one, sativa is another, indica is another, the CBDs are another. Some get you high, some don't. Sure. More questions? Yeah?
Say if you go to a dispensary and you look at all the weed that's
Yes, sir.
they display, and there's different names.
Yes.
Because of the
Train wreck,
Yeah.
blue dream, can't find my way home. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So does so say when you take one versus the other,
Yeah.
do they affect you with the dopamine, or is it the same?
It's pretty much the same. The dopamine thing is pretty much straight up. Is there a difference in the highs from them? Yeah, they're subtle. The biggest difference would be between indica and sativa. More of a body or more than a mind. But after that, all of these strains and everything else, it's so subtle that, you know, it's more for selling purposes than anything else. But it's kind of like talking about cigarettes and smoking a Camel or smoking a Winston. You know what I mean? It's, yeah.
I just want to ask a question about
Sure.
the studies coming out about the connection between like mental health issues.
Yes.
Is it teenage brain and
Yes.
recent bipolar disorder?
Yes, yes. So here's the deal. One of the things when we're talking about this stuff with tripping is that there's three kinds of drugs that get you high. Uppers, downers, and all-arounders. Drugs that when you take them speed you up and fire off dopamine, drugs that slow you down and fire off dopamine, and drugs that are hallucinogenics, that really play with the psyche. Well, THC in weed is a hallucinogenic. It's not an upper or a downer. So just smoking weed or doing whatever with weed is really playing way more with the psyche than it is for somebody else, for some of the other drugs. So that what tripping is about, which is the final stage of this weed thing, is really a schizophrenic experience. It's really separating from yourself. So yes, it plays a lot in the area of mental health. And the biggest thing about it, and this is where I'm at with weed, it's a way better drug than all this other stuff. It's just really playing with that up until age 18 or 19 while this brain is finishing developing. And it can mess with schizophrenia at that time. Once we get past that time, it doesn't seem to play with that. But yes, it's affecting mental health, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
So like when I was in college, this is a while ago, and
Yeah.
going through school, they always talked about weed as being, they categorized it as a depressant.
Yeah.
And it sounds a little.
It's not.
And it sounds different. Like it's
Yes,
really
it's not, and I'll show you when I'm teaching about weed here why people will think it's a depressant, but it's not. It's a hallucinogenic, and it's a very important thing to understand because part of what kids do is they do something called, kids, adults too, they do something called crossfading. And what crossfading is about is mixing alcohol and weed together, because those are the two that are really available for teenagers is alcohol and weed. So somebody comes along, a rapper comes along and says, listen, instead of mixing alcohol and weed, mix alcohol and Xanax. That'll get you really drunk. Well, mixing alcohol and weed won't kill you because weed is a hallucinogenic. Mixing alcohol and Xanax damn will kill you, just like it killed Marilyn Monroe and Jimi Hendrix and all these other people. So that, what do I want to say about it? So that you really need to understand what's a depressant and what isn't a depressant. And I'll teach about marijuana now. You'll understand why people think it's a depressant, because it does slow you down, but not the way a depressant does. Yeah?
You actually get schizophrenia from like only smoking weed that like no other drugs like fully get schizophrenia.
You can. And really the other drugs don't really influence it that much. The weed is really the main one that's there. And I'll tell you what it's about and why it goes into that area. I'll tell you what tripping is about. You took a marijuana brownie. There was too much THC in it. You're sitting in the chair about 45 minutes into it, and you watch the floor start to do this. Gets a wave that goes through it. That's pretty much the visual hallucination is the wall gets a wave that goes through it. The floor gets a wave that goes through it. Yeah, go ahead.
So if you've never hallucinated from smoking, like, can you actually, when you're older, have like schizophrenia? If you never go into that state?
It's possible, but let me take it into the schizophrenia thing here. So here's the deal. What a schizophrenic is about is somebody who's walking along and talking, but they're not wearing any headphones. You know what I'm saying? They really feel like they're talking to somebody else. What schizo means is split, okay? So what happens, the mental hallucination when you trip is you begin to have a schizophrenic experience. You begin to split from yourself. And it can take a lot of different forms, but it can be a very, very interesting experience. And it's one of the reasons why people will do it, is when you split, you get a chance to see yourself. So let's say I'm tripping right now. Oh, wow, look at Ralph over here. Ralph's a man, Ralph's a teacher, Ralph's a father. Isn't it interesting looking at Ralph? And it can give you some when you hear people talk about it, getting deep insight or whatever, that's what they're talking about, okay? Is that split experience of getting a chance to view yourself. However, it is a very dicey place, and you can get scared, okay? You can get scared, well, am I gonna come back to being Ralph or whatever? And when you start to get a little scared when you're tripping, and remember, you're in the schizophrenic experience, you go, oh, look at that, I'm getting scared. That makes you more scared. And you go, oh my God, I'm really getting scared. That makes you more scared. It's like the fear makes you more afraid. And it's like going down a drain. And you can get to the place where you go, oh my God, am I dying? Okay, and the reason for the dying part also is when you split like that, you're afraid that there's nothing left here. And so you can feel like it's like an ego death. You can feel like you're dying. And my concern is that smoking weed is a 2 or 3 hour high. Eating weed is 4, 6, 8, 10 hours. So you're an hour or two into the trip, and you get into this fearful place of going, oh my God, am I dying? And you're going to be there for another 4, 6, 8, 10 hours. That's the concern around this tripping thing more than anything else. However, and I'm not into scare tactics, but however, it is possible during this time when you trip that you don't come back. That you really stay tripped out in that schizophrenic experience. And the time when people experience schizophrenia mostly is during teenage time. It's rare when somebody becomes a schizophrenic as an adult. It's usually happening during this time. And it is another added risk factor into this whole weed thing for some people who have a tendency to go into that direction. So let me teach about weed a little. Question? Question? Question?
Can you get addicted to marijuana?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can't believe that myth is still there. But I'll tell you this. Google in MA. So you got AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, right? People are going there because they're alcoholics. You got NA, which is Narcotics Anonymous, and people are going to 12-step meetings all the time. Well, you Google in MA, Marijuana Anonymous, in this area, I'll bet you in 1 week, there's 20 meetings of Marijuana Anonymous, where you have people that are in this room that are trying to quit smoking weed. Yes, it's addictive, absolutely. And you have withdrawal symptoms from it as well. I'll tell you what makes it addictive more than anything else. The better you like it, the better it works, the more you get attached to it. And once you're attached to it, especially when you're young, you got to deal with that addiction. Yeah.
I was just thinking, there's like all that study stuff coming out about people on opioids using marijuana to get off of it.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm not anti-marijuana here either. This is maybe 5 years ago. I did a community meeting in Nevada City, up in the Sierras, and it was about marijuana. And a whole bunch of vets showed up, everything from Iraq to Vietnam. And what they were there for is to make sure that I didn't say anything bad about marijuana. Because they were talking to me how it helps them with their PTSD, how it helps them to get off opioids, how it helps them to go through all that. So yes, I believe it definitely has medicinal value in that way to help people get off other drugs. Yeah?
If someone is taking like prescription drugs like anti-anxiety or antidepressants, can weed affect that?
Good question. She said if somebody's taking an anti-anxiety drug or an antidepressant drug, does weed affect that? Very good question. Not sure I know the answer. entirely. But I know that what you're doing is you're messing with the dopamine system here. And so it does make it more difficult to allow the drug to work. However, if we take an antidepressant, there is another feel-good drug in the brain besides dopamine. And that feel-good drug in the brain is serotonin, okay? And when serotonin hits the receptor site, you get a different kind of feeling. Now get this, when serotonin hits the receptor site, you get a feeling of well-being. Now what the heck do I mean by a feeling of well-being? What I mean is, I feel good about myself. I don't hurt anybody, I'm a good guy, I got people in my life who love me, I have interests in my life, I feel good about who I am. That's different than, oh boy, I like chocolate ice cream and stuff. It's almost, get this is deep, it's almost like the difference between pleasure and happiness. Pleasure is very immediate, pleasure is that dopamine thing, okay? The serotonin piece is a feeling of well-being and happiness. What an antidepressant does is fire off serotonin in there, so it's not really messing with the dopamine thing. You follow what I'm saying here? So I'm not sure how much it affects it in that kind of way. As far as like if you're ADD, it can help the ADD for about 3 hours, and then it makes it worse. So that some are contraindicative, but for the most part, it doesn't, I know this sounds weird, but it doesn't interfere that much with a lot of other drugs. As a matter of fact, one of the things about weed is it can go along with some other drugs. It's the reason why people who have cancer and they're taking chemotherapy, they take some weed with the chemotherapy, it makes them not feel so sick. It really helps them on that. So in certain ways, there's a connection between them that isn't necessarily detrimental. My biggest connection, though, that my biggest concern around this stuff is that marijuana has become a gateway drug to cigarettes and nicotine. People have found out that if you mix tobacco or nicotine with weed, it makes the weed high better. That's why people roll a spliff. If you're in Jamaica, they roll a blunt. Or here now, people have started doing something called moking, which is actually putting the weed with the tobacco together. Well, I want to raise a red flag, folks. And then, and this has only happened in the last few months, but I'm watching people get manipulated here. I was up in Ukiah. This is just a couple of weeks ago, and we had a whole bigger than this room, and I said, how many people have heard about Juuls? One person raised their hand. How many people have heard about Juuls here? Look around. This is what we call watch. This is the beginning of and what it is the tobacco companies walking in to the marijuana business here. Because the tobacco companies, number one, have figured out a new way to use weed and to smoke cigarettes. You no longer have to burn it and do all that stuff. Let's just take a little battery that heats up a little coil so hot that what touches that coil vaporizes right off the coil. So you take a little nicotine thing like a Juul or whatever, and you go like that, and it delivers the nicotine straight to your brain, okay? Now, you couple that with having a little vape thing here to be able to do some wax or a dab, and so you get high on that, and then you use the Juul, okay? And I want to say something. I want to raise a red flag. When I went to high school, 1958 to 1962, cigarettes were everywhere. Weed wasn't. Cigarettes were everywhere. I smoked for 35 years. Thank God, if I was still smoking, I wouldn't be still smoking. I'd be dead now. I don't want people walking into this nicotine trap. And they are setting it up big time. And they're hooking it up with the tobacco, with the weed. And it is true that one makes the other better. But we've got to separate that stuff out. And I'll tell you, when you smoke nicotine, it's got a different receptor site. And it's way more addictive. So you can end up getting addicted to the nicotine like that, where the weed will take you much longer. And let me tell you, to get off of nicotine is a tough road. There's a lot of stuff going on with this weed stuff. I want to teach about this weed stuff for a moment. Somebody else had a question? Go for it.
Well, when you said that nicotine or like makes the high from
Better.
better,
Yes.
and, like you get higher or
You don't get higher. It keeps what it does is it keeps the dopamine floating around longer in your brain. It doesn't just do it with weed. It does it with alcohol. That's why a lot of drinkers also are cigarette smokers. It just kind of enhances the high and makes it a little bit better. I'll tell you another bizarre thing about, because I was addicted to nicotine for a long time. Listen to this for a drug. Not only does it keep dopamine floating around longer, but if you're tired and you smoke some nicotine, it perks you up and you got more energy. If you're wired and jittery and you smoke some nicotine, it calms you down. Can you imagine a drug that speeds you up when you need to be speeded up and calms you down when you need to? Truck drivers would use it a lot to be able to drive long distances like that. But it's a heck of an addictive drug and a really detrimental drug to your body. Really detrimental to your body. So I really, and the tobacco companies are just ready to make a fortune. Everybody's heard of these cigarettes, and anyway. Let me talk about weed a little bit. You all ready? Little weed intro? When I went to high school, 1958 to 1962, in New York, in the Bronx, tough high school, there was no weed. Nobody even heard about weed except we knew, Miles Davis, a trumpet player, he got busted for weed. Other than that, nobody heard about weed. Everything else was around, but no weed. Graduated high school in 1962, went off to a military school, so I was locked up for 4 years. Came out in 1966, I moved into Greenwich Village, and weed was everywhere. 1962, 4 years earlier, nobody heard about the darn stuff. 4 years later, it's everywhere. What the heck happened? Hippies. They were rejecting society. Part of what they were saying was your whole tobacco and alcohol thing is whacked. Down in Mexico, they got this drug marijuana, and it's way better. And they went down there and they bought it. They bought it as a brick, 2.2 pounds, a kilo, okay? Whoever got it smuggled it across the border, got home, went to the grocery store, bought a bunch of sandwich baggies, took the sandwich baggies, break off a handful off the brick, fill up the sandwich baggie. It weighed about an ounce and a quarter. It cost $5. Whoever had it would roll up a couple of doobies and people got high. Believe me, hippies in the 60s got high. I was there. And it had this drug in it. I got to back up for a minute. I'll get back there, but hang on a sec. There are a couple of plants on the planet, not very many, but a couple of plants on the planet that happen to have chemicals in them that match chemicals that the human brain makes. Example, in China and Afghanistan, they got a poppy plant, and it's not like the California poppy plant. This poppy plant gets a big, thick stem. When it gets ripe, it gets a bulb. You squeeze that bulb, a liquid comes out that matches something in the human brain. The liquid is opium. The human brain has an opioid site. It says, I know you opium, I do it myself, come on in. The opium comes into a human brain, goes into the opioid site, changes the way it works, and somebody gets high on opium. You got another plant on the planet, the cannabis plant. And inside the cannabis plant are two sets of drugs. One set of drugs are the CBDs, that's what we were talking about. The other set of drugs, and mainly it's one major drug, is a drug called did I do something wrong here? No. Tetrahydrocannabinol. I'm losing it here. Cannabinol. Gee, give me a break. THC. The human brain says, I know you tetrahydrocannabinol, I do it myself. I've got cannabinoid sites. Come on in. And so like a key into a lock, you bring THC into a human brain and you wait about 5 minutes and then you take a PET scan to see what's going on, what changes in the brain. And what you see is that there's 5 areas in the brain, 3 big ones and 2 little ones that just light up. Those 5 areas in the brain are cannabinoid sites. The weed comes in here, changes the way these 5 sites work, and somebody feels high on marijuana. This guy fires off dopamine. We talked about that one. This guy here makes you hungry. That's what gives you the munchies. This guy here slows you down. This is the cerebellum. And not only does it slow you down physically, it slows you down mentally. So that if you're a bit ADD, you smoke some weed, all of a sudden you can chill. But it's not a downer. That's the important thing to keep in mind. It's the cerebellum that causes this slowness and this feeling of downness. It hits this place called the hippocampus, and it plays with memory. And if you knock memory out, everything seems fresh and new. And this guy here, the amygdala, well, we're still learning about it. There's a lot of stuff connected with that. But anyway, that's this drug THC. When those hippies smoked that weed that came from Mexico in the 60s, the weed that it had was 1 to 3% THC. And it's very important to understand this drug worked. Believe me, hippies in the 60s got high. I was there, all right? What happened next was the Vietnam War. And a lot of people went to Vietnam, including me. And I smoked weed in Vietnam. And the weed in Vietnam was totally different. It was 5 to 10% THC. And so you understand the numbers here. Let's say this is 2% and this is 8%. This weed was 4 times stronger. Picture it with alcohol. You order a rum and coke in the States, and then you go to Vietnam and you order a rum and coke, except they put 4 shots of rum in instead of 1. That was this weed, 4 times stronger. It was a different strain. This weed was cannabis, but it was cannabis sativa, where this was cannabis, but it was cannabis indica. So the soldiers brought it back, came across the Pacific, landed in California, and said, hey, listen, let's take these indica seeds, we'll go up north into Humboldt County and Mendocino County and plant our seeds and start ourselves a little marijuana business here. Boy, did they ever. Marijuana changed from $5 an ounce to $5 a gram. And marijuana stopped being a hippie thing, and it turned into big business, and Northern California is the biggest place in the country for it, and it's never stopped being big business. Now I want you to just see where this drug has gone to, where you come in. Because this is a long time ago. Next step, they learned how to grow it, and they learned that when the plants are only about 3 weeks old, you can tell the difference between a male plant and a female plant. It actually has a gender. What the grower does is dig up all the male plants and throw them away, and literally throw away half the crop. But now if the female plants are growing without any male plants around, the female plants don't get fertilized. And if they don't get fertilized, they don't make seeds. And so the potency of the plant, instead of going into the seed, goes into the bud. So they started to grow just female indica plants. That bumped it up to 10 to 15% THC. And now you got to fast forward 30 years for you guys to come on here while they've been up there cloning and fertilizing and hybrids and all this other kind of stuff, that the common weed in this area is between 20 and 25% THC. You need to understand, you can go to Jamaica, Pakistan. This is some of the most powerful weed you can buy in the world today. And believe me, you buy what they call a nickel bag of purple bud. A nickel is $5 on the streets. If you took that to New York, you get $20 for it. The reason it's so cheap is that this is where it comes from. This is you guys right here. And now in comes legalization. So all of a sudden with legalization comes technology. Two pieces of technology. The biggest one, you take this 20 to 25% bud and you blow butane through it, like from a lighter. What comes out the other side is some really highly concentrated stuff that's called wax. And the wax is 50% THC. And then you can go through all these processes till you finally get to the place where you got a dab. And a dab is 95% THC. And it is available. And not only that, they made a dance out of it. You know this thing here? What this thing here is about is if you take a toke of 95% THC, which is almost pure resin, afterwards you cough your brains out. And there's the dance, somebody coughing their brains out after hitting a dab. And it's like it's become part of the thing here. This is a hell of a drug. This is no lightweight drug. This needs to be treated with respect. This got hippies high. This got everybody high in the 60s. Here's where you guys are at this point. It is a different drug. And not only is it a different drug, you can't even smoke this stuff that way. You need to have one of them e-cigarettes or something to be able to smoke this. And then you got the jewel that goes along with it. Man, we're in a different ballgame here. This drug needs to be thought of with respect. To take this and put this in your brain at this point really rattles things around. It's no lightweight drug. And considering that I only got 1 minute? 1 minute. Check this out in 1 minute. One of those cannabinoid sites down here, this hippocampus has to do with memory. And what it does is, whatever you're working on up here, it goes into all your memory banks and pulls up your knowledge about this. So you go to pick up an apple, and the hippocampus goes, hey, check it out. We're going to have an apple. Is it a red apple? Is it a green apple? Is it a yellow apple? Green apple. Pippin, Granny Smith. I mean, you got apple knowledge that gets pulled up before you ever take a bite out of the apple. That's why you expect it to taste like an apple. Smoke some weed, knock this puppy out so it's not pulling up off a long-term memory anymore. Now you pick up the apple and you take a bite out of the apple, only you're not pulling up all the old apple memories. So you go, oh my goodness, I may have had 1,000 apples in my life, but you got to taste this apple, because this apple tastes special. It's almost like eating an apple for the first time. It makes things very interesting when you wipe out memory. When you were 1 or 2 years old, you might have gotten down on your hands and knees, stay 1 second, and looked at ants. You're done with ants. Smoke weed and you might go check out the ants. That it's a very interesting experience. However, how is the hippocampus after you finish the high? Because this is what we use for learning. This is memory. How is the hippocampus after the high is over? And I'll tell you, we didn't get to this part, it takes 3 days for the weed to get out of your system. It takes 3 days for this to clear up, unlike all the other drugs that get cleared out right away. Thank you, guys.